Hello, everyone, and thank you so much to Games for Change for having me today. So we're starting to look at envisioning a new kind of healing space in games. And to start off, just to put us in the right frame of mind, I'd love to ask you to consider some questions as we're going through this. The first is, where do you go when you need to take space for yourself? And do you have any little rituals that you do from day to day that help keep you grounded in the moment? We're here, because we're bound by this common idea and belief that games have this enormous potential for good. And you don't even need to look for games that are specifically setting out to do that. Games are more than just vehicles for entertainment and distraction. They help us meditate. They help us disconnect from stress. They help us connect with other people and stories. And allow our brains to idle and play through problems. I think that there's so many examples, even in this conference, of amazing, powerful, immersive storytelling. And there's an ever-expanding sort of genre of cozy and wholesome games that people are increasingly using to help themselves recharge and relax. But what we're also seeing is a more purpose-built space in an emerging genre for games that are healing spaces. We have some non-exhaustive examples of this, like Kind Words, Lo-Fi Beats to Write Letters to, Spiritfarer, A Short Hike, that all approach the question in different ways. And there's so much room and space to look at this from multiple perspectives. And before I get too much into what we did with our latest project, I'd love to tell you a little bit about Silverstring Media and the lens that we come at this through. We started first off as a narrative design and transmedia consultancy. We assisted with games like Celeste, Where the Water Tastes Like Wine, and Crypt of the Necrodancer. We're a queer-led studio. Our primary goal is to tell diverse, impactful stories. We did several small experimental projects that dealt with themes like injustice and oppression, identity and community healing. And we look at these difficult topics from a perspective of hope. And we want to fill these digital spaces with joy, optimism, and cosmic awe. That brings us to the most successful of these experiments that we did, which was Glitchhikers' First Drive, a small 15-minute game that we released in 2014. It was basically the experience of driving alone late at night down a mostly abandoned highway, which for a lot of us in North America is a very familiar and easily accessible modern ritual. We pick up curious otherworldly hikers along the way that would really like to skip the small talk and get straight to what makes you tick. They ask you questions about your position on what your existence mean. They share curious science facts and nature facts to get you excited about the world that we live in. And they look at the dark and sometimes complex thoughts that come to us the minute we're not drowning ourselves in distraction. All of this done while hearkening back to this theme of the cosmic sublime, all of the things in our universe that could be scary, but also could be viewed as things that give us a sense of power and light and love. So fans immediately connected the dots, and we got a surprise cult following for this game and a wonderful critical response that definitely was beyond our wildest dreams, but also gave us an unexpected dimension in the response that could be best summed up by Nathan Grayson's piece, The Game That Saved Me From Driving Drunk, which gave us some insight into how a person who was going through a moment of crisis might experience this game and this liminal space of driving in a car. He spoke a lot about how cathartic it was to see even the darkest subjects reflected back at him and to be validated by the conversations he was having with hikers and reading thoughts that he thought he was alone in having right at the moment where they were most threatening and oppressive to him. But what really caught us by surprise was this quote about the end of his journey with the game. I passed a highway exit sign, a clever way to signal the game was ending, and I realized that I really, really didn't want to leave. Please let me stay. This place made me feel so much better. I needed it. I wasn't ready to go back yet. So it's from there that we figured out that we really needed to build out this experience, and there was so much more to do with it for people. We wanted to imagine spaces for everyone, which expanded to other kinds of daily rituals with the same spirit as the original. We decided to stick with spaces of transition, travel, or commute, and to make them surreal and yet familiar enough to help the players imbue these spaces with significance, a sense of magic and importance. It's an experience that's there when you need it, and that has more content that speaks to different moments, and that shuffles up these different symbols and conversation topics like a tarot deck, and deals you a fragmented picture at random that's made whole by the player interpretation. We called it the Spaces Between, and it had 4 expanded journey modes. One was the original highway, a pathway that lets you walk through a national park late at night, a railway commute through a mountainous region, and the terminal, which is an airport terminal where all of the planes have been grounded and there's no way out. A little bit of a purgatorial space and something that's perhaps familiar to travelers at the moment. We wanted these spaces to be dreamlike and disconnected from the daily rush, to hold space for you and then release you back into your life as you need it. So creating healing spaces. The first and most important caveat to this is we are not mental health professionals. This is not a replacement for therapy, and we certainly didn't create it in a clinical setting. What we wanted to do with this game was provide a listening ear, a kind and compassionate mirror, a friend and a place to go. So these spaces for everyone that had more content to meet the moments of your life and wider themes and travel types would provide spaces that players could truly use as their own. We wanted it to be more accessible, both in terms of eliminating barriers for disabled players and also avoiding skill barriers that would put off non-traditional segments from trying out the game. This is not just for gamers, this is really an experience for everyone. And every aspect of the design, art style, and music tries to access a particular headspace that leaves the player feeling open and vulnerable, but still comforts them and holds them so that the experience they have feels a little bit more guided and guarded. Interacting with the spaces is a very challenging question in the game because we wanted to make sure that we weren't throwing in everything in the kitchen sink. The point of Glitchhikers is not to be everything to everyone, but rather to provide a very curated and focused experience that keeps you present. The control schemes, we use the design principle to be evocative but stay out of the way. The movement and interaction grounds and immerses the player. For example, with the highway, you have a very limited amount of control over your vehicle. You're slowing down, you're speeding up, and you're changing lanes, but mostly you're just along for the ride. It's not the power fantasy of driving. Instead, it's the mental and emotional experience of driving and feeling that isolation set in. Other levels changed that a little bit in order to provide a multiple or a multifaceted experience for different energy levels or different needs. The terminal, which you just saw a clip of, for example, allows you to basically parkour around the airport environment because we wanted a space where players could be more frenetic and energetic. But at the same time, this is also the most claustrophobic of all of the environments. So it plays with this juxtaposition of control and freedom and constraint. Reframing time is a theme that I've seen in a lot of games being presented here at this conference, and something that we definitely considered with Glitchhikers. Like I've already said, we wanted the experience to be really dreamlike and surreal, and to keep the player in the present moment. I think that in modern time, we are often kept to this very strict definition of productivity and monetization, very regimented and externally controlled uses of time, where time is scarce and people feel drained. There is a very important aspect to healing that requires space for processing. And so we wanted to make sure to allow the player to slow down. And using these travel spaces was a good way to do that, that would follow the player outside of the game and allow them to reclaim these spaces for themselves in everyday life. That's definitely feedback that we heard from First Drive, where we would have players up to 8 years later contacting our studio and letting us know that, you know, they don't take nighttime drives without thinking about the experience that they had in this game, without falling into that same kind of meditative open headspace and letting themselves wonder. We've seen so much evidence for the power of fiction to expand empathy, strengthen theory of mind, and shift attitudes. The emotional transportation, particularly of very fixed and focused narratives, allows players to inhabit other perspectives and really feel on a real level what those situations are like for people, in ways that sort of allow for more understanding and also sidestep defensiveness. In Glitchhikers, we have a freeform narrative where things are presented that are both general and specific to allow players to feel their experience reflected back at them. And we are dealing a lot with cognitive closure in this space. One of our comments that we got was, Glitchhikers is full of the kind of conversations that you have when you're young, and this is entirely intentional. We're trying to bring you back to a time in your life before you decided how everything works already, so that you could get on with things and pay your bills. We really want to reopen closed subjects and let people deal with a headspace that's more allowing of creativity and problem solving. Cognitive closure is a very important thing to allow people to function, to survive, and to be efficient in their day-to-day life, but it really can be the enemy of creative thinking, which is something that we all need in order to work through problems both that are personal and communal. And that brings us to bridging the gap between individual and communal healing, which is often presented as a sort of dichotomy in our society. Mental health is thought of as a very individual pursuit, and the goal is often framed as sort of optimizing your personal productivity or functioning. And the pathways are often presented as disconnecting from people around you or situations around you. Don't read the news, take a bubble bath. This ignores the need for community and the effect of societal ills and injustice on mental health, and just really serves to become a very isolating experience. Glitchhikers tries to ground and contextualize problems by naming them, looking them in the eye, and acknowledging the difficult topics like climate crisis, violence, political polarization, and oppression. They're validating your feelings and anxieties and giving you space and time to consider alternate paths and reframing to problem solve. On the flip side, community spaces and social justice and activist spaces often call on us to sacrifice our mental health or our personal well-being in order to further a cause, but this doesn't really give us what we need to create longevity and continuity in these spaces and to really progress a movement forward that brings everyone with them. So we wanted to imagine a use case for this game that guards against this kind of burnout and gives people a place to retreat and recharge so that they can continue along a constant cycle of progressing these movements. The self is an I and a we. The enemy is apathy, empathy, fatigue, and hopelessness. And we fight it by shedding toxic positivity without killing hope. And that brings us to the main mechanic of Glitchhikers, which is the conversations. There could have been another version of this game where there were no hikers. Maybe we leave you in these spaces with this atmosphere and just let your mind go. Or we presented these prompts or questions in the form of thought bubbles and framed them as the player's internal experience. But it was very important to us to use conversation and companionship and to center that as something that breaks the feeling of isolation that's very present in the game. We wanted to see our own experiences reflected back with empathy from an external source, an opportunity to push back on ideas or feelings that we don't agree with and to be pushed back in turn, and to find entirely new perspectives. There are characters in this game that talk about things that are so universal, like the experience of a breakup, or grieving a loved one, or dealing with the stress of being pulled in many different directions and never feeling like you have enough time to achieve your goals. But there's also perspectives from characters that are refugees, that are queer, that are living in systems that perhaps not everyone has a direct access to, in order to bridge that gap in understanding and make people more socially conscious and aware. We also want these conversations to be cooperative, which is something of a lost art in our digital age. The hikers' viewpoints are never presented as complete. They aren't trying to give you the answers to all of these strange universal questions. They're really just prompting you to think about it. They're letting you test your opinions out with the barest of friction and all the space in the world to think it through. The conversations don't assume your knowledge or your experience. They want to make you curious and to be used as a starting point so that you can take these ideas and these prompts out into the world and speak to other people about it, look for connection, look for community and outside input, because there's always a more complete picture with more perspectives. Another tool that we hope to model that's just as important, and in fact the other side of the coin as openness, is boundaries and consent in order to help people fortify themselves for the world. We do this by modeling it in several different ways in the game, particularly through our extensive consent system, which features content filtering toggles that allows the player to better predict and shape the experience that they're going to have in the game, but also that allows you to end a conversation that you're already in the middle of when you decide it's not something you feel like doing right now. And to have the hiker in the game respond with grace and understanding. Thank you for speaking with me. I understand that this was difficult. Not everyone has the capacity to do this all the time. I appreciate that you shared your boundary with me. Conversely, hikers, while they always remain compassionate and meet the player where they're at, also have buttons that they don't let you get away with pushing. For example, we have a wheelchair user hiker who you can ask very persistent questions to, and if you cross a certain line with them, they're going to let you know that the underlying tenets of those questions have ableist origins, or redirect you to not ask personal questions that cross a boundary with people in the real world. So the takeaways, this is obviously not a universal how-to guide. I don't think every game should be or can be Glitchhikers, but I do think that there is so much space and a need for purpose-built healing spaces in every interpretation of what that means. If you've been thinking about the questions I posed to you at the very beginning, and you found an answer that has nothing to do with nighttime travel spaces or nothing to do with existential conversations, I'm pretty sure that would be a great starting point to building your own kind of healing space. Something else that everyone can take away from this is that we need to interrogate the conventional mechanics of our games that fight your intentions. Not every game has to do everything. It wouldn't have made sense to suddenly let you start shooting things in the terminal of Glitchhikers. It might be fun for certain players, it might have attracted them, but it wouldn't have given the experience that we want. Games as a medium is so wide and so rich that there is space, and all the space in the world, to allow you to create experiences that evoke different kinds of feelings. And finally, I think it's very important to get comfortable with loose ends and open-ended questions. As a narrative studio, this was a particular challenge for us with Glitchhikers, because we're used to creating cohesive, contained stories that wrap things up in a bow. But some topics just don't work that way, and some stories are just too nuanced. It's important to train players also to interrogate and trust their own wisdom so that they can use those skills in order to examine life further. As we say at the end of every play session in Glitchhikers, I want to thank you for traveling with us today. I hope that this has helped to spark something in you and to continue conversations outside of this room. More journeys await. I can't wait to see what they look like and to see more games coming in this emerging genre. And I'd be very happy to discuss this with anyone either after this presentation or tonight at the Meet the Speakers event. Thank you.